I'm glad that I got thrown in the field because you learn to respect the trade more rather than if you would skip the field work and then go straight into ops and management. Grandma was bigger than a house pregnant with your dad. She was mixing the mud and I was laying the block. So that's the start. That's the start of it. Look, and I'm like, does he know when he gets off of that plane, there is going to be all cornfields and there's nothing around. Where should we put these guys up at? Where's a good hotel? I was like, there isn't one. I've been shut down, ignored many times through different meetings and different avenues and different opportunities I tried to pursue, and get the door slammed on me saying, you're too young, you don't know what you're doing yet, things like that. Don't get sidetracked by other people's comments because you're going to hear a million different things and they don't know what they're talking about. There's going to be days that are very hard. You're going to be exhausted. You're going to wonder why you did this, but overall, on average, there's going to be more good days than bad days. So always remember that. And just remember that you're on the right path for yourself. And again, don't buy into all of the other stuff that you're hearing from others.
Welcome, everybody, to the next episode of the Construction MF'ers podcast. I am Scott Peper, CEO and founder of Mobilization Funding, and today I'm excited to bring you some amazing perspective from a great young man, a business talent in construction, in real estate development, third generation business. And yes, we all know the adage, but this is one of those break the mold moments. You're going to meet a third generation who's growing this business and he's really kicking ass. I'm excited to introduce you guys to the president of the Kerstiens Companies, Ruger Kerstiens.
Thank you, Scott.
Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I mean, growing up in a solid family like that, you got your grandfather around, you got your grandfather's friends, you got your dad, your dad's friends, you're learning at 12 years old, you're in those seats, propped up on some books. When did you know that getting into the family business was something you wanted to do? And then what approach did you take to put yourself in the right position to be able to be ready?
So the good thing about, I don't know how some other family businesses are, but, growing up, it was never pushed on me saying like, hey, you're going to have to do this whenever you get older. They left it as, if you're interested in this, we'll teach you and you can learn. But, even going back through, my mom, she kept a memory box for me. And whenever I moved into my house, she said, hey, you need to take this because I need more room in my attic. And I took it and I looked through it and there was pictures, books. I don't even know how old I was, but based on my handwriting, I had to be pretty young. And, questions in kindergarten and stuff, what do you want to be when you get older? And everything that I wrote down was, I want to, be a farmer. I want to build houses, or, it all revolved around that. And whenever I started working at the farm, I really enjoyed that. Learned a little bit about work ethic and how to operate some machinery. And then from there, I never really thought about doing anything else. And I guess I just never really put much more thought into doing anything else because I just really enjoyed what I was doing. And that's whenever I turned 14, I remember that Christmas, I got a concrete trowel, pair of rubber boots, and a rake for Christmas. And I said, well, I guess I'm on the concrete crew now. And so I was on the concrete crew for a while. And all of the guys there, they got a laugh out of it. Obviously, I wasn't much help at the beginning whenever I was really young, but they were patient and they taught me a lot of things. And I joke. And then, a couple of years later, for Christmas, I get a tool belt with a framing hammer and some other things. And I said, well, I guess that means I'm on the framing crew now. So I started framing. And they never quite trusted me with the finish work and the flooring and the trim. I guess they realized that my carpentry skills were not that good. So I stayed on the concrete and framing for a while until I went to college. And whenever I was in college, same thing. Always in the back of my mind, I thought, I'll probably be coming back to Southern Indiana and working with the family. I never really had another plan in mind. And I sat down in lecture hall in business class. I went to through the Kelley School of Business here in Indiana, and sat down next to a guy, and he seemed pretty interesting, and we got to talking. And he was a big real estate guy. He's a broker now, and same thing. He grew up with his family doing rental properties, property management, stuff like that. So we had a lot in common in that respect. And after that lecture, he said, "Hey, we're getting a real estate club started here at IPUI, and you should join. Seems like you're really interested in this." So I didn't know that there was a real estate club or anything like that. And so he took me along to one of those meetings, and we just kept talking, and our friendship grew. And that's where I got a little disconnected from the family business for several years whenever I was living up in Indianapolis. And we flipped a few homes. Me and him became partners, and we flipped some houses. I bought a house that I lived in and then rented out to my friends, and we lived in there, and did pretty well for college kids. And then through that process, I was at a networking event, and I met a guy named Bob. He had a commercial contracting company up in Indianapolis, and throughout the conversation, he said, "Oh, you kind of know what you're talking about when it comes to construction. What's your plans? What are you doing?" So, well, me and a friend of mine we're doing some projects on our own, doing stuff like that. And he said, "Well, what do you think about coming to work for me for a little while?" Because through that conversation, I told him, I said, eventually I'm going to be moving back home. I don't want to go start working somewhere and, up and leave and then leave them hanging with a job open and stuff. He said, "Well, I'll take however many years you're willing to give me. I'll take you for it." So I started working with him. I think that was my junior year.
I was gonna say, this is while you're still in school.
Yeah, while I was still in school, and I really liked working for him, and I liked. He didn't really have a job title for me. I was whatever he told me to do, I did, and so we started there, and gosh, I loved it, and I really liked working for him. So I talked to the people at the school, and I said, "Hey, how can I get out of this? I don't want to drop out, but I want to graduate early so I can go work." And so they got me on some classes, and I fast tracked, and I graduated a year early. And then I worked for him full time for what would have been my senior year. And I really liked it. And it was a bittersweet moment, whenever I was concluding my time with him, because it got to a point where the family was telling me, he said, "Hey, I know you really like working up in Indy, but we could use some help down here. So maybe it's time to start thinking about moving back home." So we wrapped up some projects that I was working on with him, and we didn't say our goodbyes because I still talk to him all the time. He's a good friend of mine still. And so that was in 2018. And I started then working full time back here in management. So that's kind of the progression of my start to whenever I moved back home and got more into the management operations side versus in the field. So
tell me what you learned from those couple experiences in college. Like, so, you had the framing hammer, the framing belt, you had the concrete tools, you were in business side of things, but yet still keeping connected to the field side of things. Like, what are the 2 or 3 things you really took away from that experience?
Well, in school, I learned, when you're 18, 19 years old, you're not as smart as you think you are. Went to, I did we were looking online and seeing, how can we get properties cheaper? And then here comes, you need to go to a sheriff's sale and buy a property out of there. That's a really good idea if you know what you're doing. So the first one worked out great. And then we go back and we do a second one. And we bought a second mortgage, not the first. Yeah. Yeah. So we got it. We were excited. We were high-fiving afterwards. Yeah, we're going to make all kinds of money on this deal. And then we get a letter not too long after that saying the first mortgage they're foreclosing on the property. And we were like, wait a second, that's not right. And so here we are negotiating a payoff on that first mortgage. And pretty much what it boiled down to is the amount that was on the first mortgage was our profit that we thought we were going to make. And we ended up breaking even if we would really calculate everything, we probably lost some money on that one. But that was a hard lesson. So now I've bought in a few properties out of sheriff's sale, but I make sure to double check at county records to make sure that we're actually buying the first mortgage, not the second.
And there's no tax liens.
Yeah, I know. So we learned a lot through that. So that was one big lesson. Make sure that if you don't know what you're doing, get a title company to run a search for you and just pay that fee and get that out of the way right away so you don't deal with that problem. I'd say the second thing, especially at a young age that I learned, I'm glad that I got thrown in the field because you learn to respect the trade more rather than if you would skip the field work and then go straight into ops and management. You're a little disconnected on what it's really like to be working in the field. And, I'm not saying that I spent half my life in the field or anything like that, but there was many years still today. I, go out and I'll jump in and help too when it's needed, but it really tells guys that do that for their entire life as a career, you respect the work ethic and the hard work a lot more. And I think you have a lot more appreciation for the guys that are on your crew and a more understanding whenever things don't go perfectly. You just understand more. And I think it also helps, a little bit on the other end, getting respect from the guys in the field, knowing that, you haven't been through it all, but you've been through it, you understand, So I think that was a big eye opener at a young age, just seeing, people always say it's hard work, but I mean, it's hard work. It's hard work. And you respect the construction trades a lot more after being in it like that. So I'd say those are probably at this point in time, the ones that stand out. Those are some of the biggest lessons and things that really stand out to me.
Well, you're a young guy, but you also started real young, building that foundation of information, knowledge, content. I mean, 12 years old is not the average age of someone today jumping into a tractor or a trailer on a work site, learning from their grandfather and their grandfather's friends and catching that wisdom. And kudos to you. If they are, not all those same kids are looking to listen either or go back for a second day, and the fact that you grasped onto that. At what point did you take that foundation of knowledge though and say, you know what, I want to go to school, but I want to go to school that's going to help arm me for this family business? How did you connect that? Because a lot of times in this journey, you might just jump right in to the family business. Why go to school?
Yeah, I would credit that to my parents really pushed me in going into school, and even my grandparents, they thought it was really cool that, our family had evolved to the point where, we're able to send our kids to college and it was the thing that you did. And that's what, people deemed as a path to success, is getting a college degree. And, I'd agree with that. And I would say a lot of it, I wanted to go, one for, have the true experience as a young person going to college and getting that experience, but then also hoping to learn things that I wouldn't have learned if I wouldn't have ventured out into a whole nother city. I didn't know anybody, they didn't know me. So I kind of had to carve my own path and make my own way, my own connections. And by doing that, I think, that's what got me excited whenever I moved up to Indianapolis, because there was a couple colleges that were a little bit closer. And I said, oh, that's kind of too close. I still know some people there. Let's go farther away to where I don't know anybody. And it's going to force you. And I grew as a person. So I'm happy for that. But I'd say a lot of it boiled down to, I wanted to make my family proud too. Especially, my grandparents always say too, we grew up on, we didn't have running water and we had dirt floors whenever we were kids. And to see where our family is able to come thus far, they were just, it's whenever we, over dinner, we'll all get together at grandma and grandpa's house and talk about things. And sometimes we'll get on the topic of how far we've come. And it's just really cool. And I would say that probably is what drove me. I got the degree, finished that out, but I would say that was a big driver. Was one, I wanted to get the experience, wanted to make new connections. move away, learn new things, but also at the same time, I think a lot of people have that natural tendency that they want to make their family proud as well. And I'd say that was another big piece of it. So.
Well, speaking of making them proud, why don't you tell us a little bit about the business and the family business? What does it do, the size and scope of it? I think it's pretty impressive to talk about here, and some of the things I want to dive into a little bit more about what you're doing now with it and your ideas. But why don't you talk a little bit about the family business, give everybody a little lay of the land overview.
Sure. So it's anymore it's a little bit of a complicated web, but whenever it all started, it was very simple. It was grandpa and grandma, the grandpa was a carpenter, working for some guys doing work like that, and grandma was on a dairy farm growing up, and he got enough skills and he said, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do this thing by myself now. So she started helping. He always, the way they always say it, grandma was bigger than a house pregnant with your dad. She was mixing the mud and I was laying the block. So that's the start. That's the start of it. And he said, I built my first house and I sold it for $14,000. And he said, from there, I had enough money and we were off to the races. So that's where the construction business started. The home construction business was back in 1961, whenever they were building houses. And then from there, it evolved into the primary business forever was always single family houses. And then whenever housing was slow, then they would venture out and they'd do some churches, some nursing homes and things like that, some light commercial construction. And so it grew in that respect up until the late 80s, and their insert was about to the age where my dad was at a working age and he was able to jump in and start working as well. And whenever they started working together, they continued building houses, commercial buildings and things like that. But then, they built a lot of apartments for other people. And then finally the light turned on and they said, hey, why don't we try to build these and hold on to a few of them, let's just try it out and see how it goes. So they tried that out through the 90s. And that's whenever the property management company was born, because eventually got to a point where there was enough properties that they had acquired through construction that they needed to manage themselves. So that evolved in the 90s. And then from there into the 2000s, building apartments, building houses. And then that's whenever leading up to 2008, which everybody on this podcast is very familiar with that. I was a young kid, so I didn't really know what was going on other than we were having a lot of problems in the business and at home. It was, not a very fun time from what I can remember. And that's when my uncle, he was working out in California doing construction out there. And it was kind of a consolidation of all the family members coming back together. And my uncle came back into the business. And then from there, my grandpa, he never retired, still didn't retire. I was at the office with him this morning a little bit. And my uncle then took in charge of the home construction and development business, led those crews. My dad then was in charge of the apartment development and the property management and the investing arm of the business. And that's where it grew then from 2008 until about 2018. And then 2018 is whenever I came back and they said, hey, we need help. And I said, okay, well, where do you need me? And just put me wherever you need help. So like, we need somebody to be in charge of the apartment construction. So I started, originally, whenever I first started back, I was doing the apartment construction and setting up the new developments and things like that. I really took a liking to the development side, which, little sometimes political and a lot of underwriting, a lot of things to make sure that this is feasible. It's all going to work. Like, well, you're educated, you should know what to do. And so, yeah, right.
Which form of education is that supposed to prepare you? The actual formal one or the School of Hard Knocks, or are you about to enter the School of Hard Knocks?
Yeah, it was a combination of both. I thought I knew what I was doing. And, looking back now, like, what in the world was I thinking at that time? Luckily, it all worked out.
Not all the teachers at school were developers too, were they?
No, it was a lot of corporate business teachers that really had nothing. We didn't learn a whole lot about development and construction, not at all. But
yeah, no, I get it.
And so that I know it's a long-winded answer, but that it all led to now we built out where we've got a home construction business, we've got a full apartment construction business, we've got the property management, we've got the development arm, and then we here recently we were having a lot of problems with the mechanical, plumbing, and electrical, and there was an opportunity here locally. There was an owner that was wanting to sell his business, and we had been looking for about 2 years to bring that business into ours to help us have a competitive advantage, especially on the single family side. We can control a little bit more of the cost. And then we saw what we were paying out every year just for those trades only. So, well, if we can bring that in-house and then continue to do third-party contracts on other commercial jobs, should be a good business. And so we proceeded with that. And now I guess our total company portfolio is single family development, construction, multifamily development, construction, property management, and then the HVAC, plumbing, and electrical business all underneath the one umbrella. And for whenever I say it sounds like a lot, we don't have we're right around 100 employees altogether between the companies. So, and that's split. We all have our own duties, still have my uncle, running this, my dad runs this, and then I run this division. So we split it up, and it's very manageable that way. So.
Well, it's interesting because what I loved about your story, and I was glad you touched on it, is the fully integrating your world and the verticals, especially over time. I mean, right now, you're such a mature business in the foundation of the construction aspect, but as you run into problems like labor shortages, subcontractors, I mean, if you're going to build larger or even medium, small scale commercial projects, apartment homes, even residential homes, you're going to be limited by your trades. So,
yeah.
You can have the biggest plans on earth, but if you don't have the trades and you don't have the skills, you're going to be tough. And so to find what I thought was really genius on your all's part is being able to move into those aspects and finding a good partner, acquiring them, bringing their family and team in, and then being able to control more of those aspects really gives you a competitive advantage, not only in the market, but in your cost and your cost structure, and then stability.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good peace of mind, even one, getting the contractor there to do, because whenever we were, especially on the homes, it was very dependable. We knew exactly when to be there. But on the apartment projects, I think some of our subs are, hey, that's because whenever we build apartments, we own them and maintain them afterwards. We don't sell the assets off after we're done. Like, oh, it's okay if it gets delayed a little bit. But then it gets delayed, and then now the next sub is delayed, and then it turned into a mess. We're like, hey, we need you here now. So one, controlling the cost is a big one, but also controlling the schedules for sure. That's been massively beneficial. We've been doing it now, having this company for 8 months, and how smoothly the projects are going since we acquired that business. It is, you save one, you get one less headache, but then you gain a couple more headaches now, with more employees and different things. So this for that, balance it out. But we're very happy with the way it's all working out.
But at least it's on you too. You're controlling those costs. And like when I say cost too, you have hard costs, but then to your point, you also have those soft costs, which are operational costs. They could be opportunity costs. I mean, if you delay a project a month or two and you carry that debt, or you're carrying just cash on hand, those have costs. Or you're not open when you thought you were going to be able to open. You don't have your CO, and now you got all these rents, tenants. I mean, there's a lot of costs that can be filtered into a bigger organization the way you guys have it top down. And so being mindful of that and strategically, utilizing your resources, both people and talent and capital, I think has been a real key driver to your structure. And then I think your structure gives you a lot of success, particularly in today's climate with labor being a big hot issue. It's not easy.
No, not at all. And that's where we, in the home building, you got to be, every dollar per square foot added makes a huge difference to the end user. Same on our investments into the apartment projects that we're building. As soon as you get there's a certain level you get to, and if we go over this cost per square foot, it doesn't even make sense for us to develop these apartments anymore. So that's where that was that was our biggest cost whenever we were going in, besides infrastructure. But yeah, it gives us peace of mind knowing that our strategy now is safe until we get to another headwind that we're going to have to overcome. I'm sure there will be one in the future, but yeah. So that's a
well. Speaking of headwinds, you guys have such a good history and experience in your marketplace with residential real estate, multifamily real estate, and even some commercial real estate. The construction, you've seen construction costs and spikes. You've seen pricing. You've seen labor issues. With all the dynamic shifts going on today, and some of the next, what do you forecast to see in the real estate market in the next 4 years in those segments? And how are you guys, are you making any changes to adapt to whatever those are?
Yeah. So I think I've got a multifaceted answer on that, depending on the, what type of project that we're working on. But I think what a lot of it boils down to, and I know we're not alone in this, but one, land cost has gone up tremendously, especially in our area. People will laugh whenever I say what we pay per acre in Southern Indiana compared to, other larger cities, but our relative prices on what we can rent apartments and houses for also is less. So the land cost has gotten expensive. So that's been extremely difficult. And there's a lot of farmers that don't have to sell. So getting them to agree to a price to sell typically is not very favorable on our end. Not anymore anyways. The next big one for us is the infrastructure cost. So where we develop, typically speaking in the past, it's always been at the developer's full responsibility to install all of the public infrastructure that goes into the projects. I know there's some communities that have always assisted in some things for those, but it got to a point where, we looking at projects and we would tell the towns that, we can't do this project in your town because the infrastructure cost is too high. It doesn't make any sense. And that's where, at the time, I had no idea that there was such thing as a public-private partnership. So then they said, well, what can we do to make this work? And said, well, we need X amount of funds to get this to work. And people, listen, probably gonna laugh that it took us so long to figure this out. But, there is certain ways out there to help subsidize some of the infrastructure, especially if it's public infrastructure that utilities will be selling their services out of. So that's a way that we got creative, and we were able to overcome some of the cost burdens. And, that comes in lieu of, tax abatements, some setting up TIF districts, things like that, getting direct assistance on the infrastructure installment on materials, whether you share material labor costs with the local municipality there. On apartment projects, we dove into the redevelopment tax credit end, got some help on that. So there was a lot of different ways. So I think for us, it's necessary now to whatever community that we're developing in, it's pretty much brought up right away saying, hey, this is more than likely going to require some type of public-private relationship in order for this development to happen. And they've been very receptive of that because we need housing, especially in rural communities. And the last big one is debt cost, and everybody knows that. I mean, it's gone up tremendously, especially whenever I dived in. Whenever I first started, we were getting commercial loans at 5.5, I think, and we were like, yeah, this is great. Then it went down to 3.5. Wow, this is fantastic. And then one of the projects that we wrapped up, last year, it's 7.75%, 8%, and holy smokes. So, and then whenever you try to do, I'm underwriting developments that we've got coming up, hopefully coming up here soon, and underwriting debt, that's also a big killer. It's really hindered. It made good projects turn into very mediocre projects. And then whenever they look like that, it's hard to get motivated and do it. But we've been
adds risk too.
Pardon?
It adds risk.
Yeah, a lot. And yeah, because they're like, oh, you talk to a couple lenders like, oh, it's this right now, but maybe next year it'll go down. And yeah, well, maybe it won't. And then what? So
well, they also are lending less too as a percent. You might, where you were getting, whatever, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85% at 3% money. Not only are you getting 7.25 or 7.75 or 8, but you're getting it on 50 to 60, 65%. The equity requirements are different in those developments too. And I mean, obviously if you have long-standing lending relationships and you're buying the assets right, that may not be the case, but there's a lot of barriers to entry on the lending side in the development world that have been hindrance aside from just cost of capital. interest rate?
Cash goes, it just disappears a lot faster now than it did a couple of years ago. So the velocity of projects for how much we've grown has remained, it should have picked up with it, but it's remained pretty consistent to what it was then, mainly from a capital standpoint, because we don't raise funds or syndicate or anything like that. We have everything privately held. So it limits us a little bit on deal volume.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Ruger, in your market, do you see a lot of the hedge funds or other large asset managers, your Blackstones, your BlackRock? Are they coming in and buying a lot of assets? Are you competing with them in your market?
I laugh because we live what people would say in the middle of nowhere, really, and it's in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing relatively close to where we're at, and we only work in rural communities. You know, I'd say about 25,000 population less. That's where all of our projects are in. So very small markets. And I was talking to friends of mine from school that are brokers now for firms in Indianapolis, and they know me as the real estate guy in Southern Indiana. So whenever they need something, they call me and ask questions about certain properties and things. And they're like, hey, you know, because we buy assets too. And, you know, in 2018, 19, 20, we were buying stuff, and you were always competing against local regional guys, never anybody from California, New York, or wherever they're coming from. And in 2021, 2022, I was getting calls from my friends and like, hey, I've got this guy flying in from New York. He's going down to this town. He's going to take a look. And I'm like, does he know when he gets off of that plane, there is going to be all cornfields and there's nothing around? And he's like, I tried to tell him and give him a heads up on what it's going to be like when he gets there. And I was like, I can't believe what I'm hearing right now. And so all that to be said, up until here recently, there hasn't been anybody, you know, large firms like that buying assets in our area. But I think naturally everybody moved out of some metro markets looking for better pricing, and they found, you know, the Midwestern cities, and like, well, you know, there still is a decent return in some of these areas. And so there's been a handful of properties picked up by firms like that. But I just laugh whenever they call and say, hey, where should we put these guys up at? Where's a good hotel? I was like, there isn't one, really.
Airbnb.
Yeah, there isn't any options, but there's not many, but there is a handful that are starting to buy in and around this area. I've been getting a lot of calls from larger institutions and people interested in buying our portfolios and stuff, and it's getting phone calls from people I never thought that we would. But
yeah, what's next for your guys' company? And you guys have evolved and you've stayed evolving and you've been successful. What's your vision for the business here over the next 10 years?
So the goal right now, you know, for the property management side, you know, we've had a common goal that we're trying to acquire apartments to the sum of about 2,500 units, give or take. And that will set us up pretty well for a good foundation on the property management side, to where that business has, you know, it's kind of off on its own. It's got enough assets. So that's kind of where we're going whenever we acquire, whenever we develop apartments, you know, over the next, whatever I wrote down a couple of years ago, in 10 years, I wanted to be at that. Where after this year here, we'll be right around 1,600, but I'm starting to focus more on the dollar value of the projects now, not so much the unit count. As I grow older and wiser, starting to realize that there's more to it than just that. On the home business side, that's a well-established business. Right now, we're producing about 60 homes a year, and the goal is to keep growing that and get to about 100 homes a year. And we feel like we'll be pretty happy with that. And on the HVAC, plumbing and electrical side, I look at that in terms of revenue. And right now, what we've got on the books, you know, it's very recent for us on that acquisition, but we're probably going to wrap up our first year right around 8 to 9 million revenue on that business. And the goal over the next 5 years on that one is take it up to 20. So pretty ambitious goal on growing that out, but there's room in the market. I think there's a lot of missed opportunities that I've recognized just in the short time that I've been there. So that's kind of the general consensus of where we're all moving towards over the next several years.
What would you tell, look, the millennials and the Gen Z generations are really the next group of younger workforce coming in. And now even we're approaching the next generation here as of January 25. What would you tell those folks about the construction industry, property management, real estate, the trades that they may not know or they may think differently of? That if they knew two or three different things that they may not, what would you want them to be? What would you tell them?
Don't show up to a meeting in a suit, especially if you're in Southern Indiana. That's number one. People get turned off by suits. I know that, but that's not a good answer on that. I'd say what I found in, especially being on the younger end of the spectrum, it's a business dominated by older individuals because it is a capital intensive business, really. And I've been shut down, ignored many, many times through different meetings and different avenues and different opportunities I tried to pursue, and get the door slammed on me saying, you're too young, you don't know what you're doing yet, things like that. But being persistent, I'd say if somebody had to put a characteristic to me, and I've heard several people tell me whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, like, I give you one thing, you're very persistent. So I would say persistence, and especially if you're getting into development, you got to have really thick skin. Do not let the comments and the feedback from others' opinions bother you. Do what you think is right, and if you really believe it's right in your heart, stick to your mission and get it done. Don't get sidetracked by other people's comments, because you're going to hear a million different things and they don't know what they're talking about. So that's what I've concluded so far. Now, I'm sure I'm going to learn many more lessons coming up, but
Take someone that's in high school, or maybe they're in college right now, but let's say they're in high school and they're thinking about going to college, and they're thinking about the building trades. What would you want them to know, kind of future that is offered to them in that world? Like, what kind of income can they make? Do they have lots of opportunity? Is it just a place to go when you don't go to college? Like, what would be your opinion on that? How would you frame that up to someone who's like, I don't really want to go to school, but I'm looking at construction?
I think I'm biased on that because I'm in this line of work, but I have
Mhm.
a lot of kids in high school, and I have a lot of interns that work for me because I still am, partial to helping kids get started, especially ones that are, hey, all my friends are going to college and I don't want to go. What can I do? Well, you can go. You don't have to go to a trade school, but you can go to a trade school and you can go there for a year, get a certification, and then go start working in the field. And the trades that we employ, it's, I know where some of my friends, whenever they got out of college, where they were at in their careers, plus, minus the debt they incurred while they were in school. I said, ignore that. Don't get drawn into the flashy and the fancy stuff. I said, if you stick on this track, this is about what it's going to look like for you. And it's a very nice career. It's a very stable career, because you're not going to be, I can't say never, but to my knowledge at the moment, none of these trades that you're doing are replaceable. So you're always going to be valuable. And so that's something that I help them out. And I also try to give them a little pep talk and throw them out, with the guys on jobs that are probably a little bit harder than others, just so they understand that, I don't know every trade school if they really teach them the amount of grit and days that are not going to be as fun as others, but said, don't let a couple bad days on the job deter you. There's going to be days that are very hard. You're going to be exhausted. You're going to wonder why you did this, but overall, on average, there's going to be more good days than bad days. So always remember that. And just remember that you're on the right path for yourself. And again, don't buy into all of the other stuff that you're hearing from others. Being in a trade is a very reputable and a very honorable career. So that's the lesson and the things that I try to teach to some of the high school kids that call me for advice or help anyways.
Yeah, and when those kids ask you, in the MEPs, say, for example, electricians, plumbers, HVAC, what do you answer to them when they ask you what the income expectations are today, 5 years from now, and 10 years from now? And what can they expect to be making?
So It's a good question. And I don't know if I'd be able to dial it in. I tell them, I said, the first few years, you're not going to make very much. I said, you're not going to, you're definitely going to be making less than what you would desire to make, but you also don't know anything.
I think it's important though. I think people need to realize that you don't have to go to school. You can get in the trades. And if you're willing to get certifications, take on leadership roles, do more, add more value, really learn, put a lot of effort in, you can make as much or more than your average person coming out of a 4-year school. And if you really can adopt skills like leadership and you can start to manage projects and see things to fruition, I mean, it's not hard to make 6 figures in a role like that, especially if you give
Correct.
yourself a 5, 6, 10-year horizon or even more.
Correct. And I think that's a good point, especially, I don't know about metro areas, but here, in Southern Indiana, more rural, it's very common for, blue collar and trades to earn more than, management or office jobs here in our area anyways. I know every place is different, and I think people are starting to catch on to that a little bit now because some of my younger guys that I have working for me, I ask them, they talk about their friends, and it's becoming more and more common that I'm seeing, people getting into a trade or going to trade school versus going to a typical 4-year college and getting, whatever, an admin degree or, marketing, whatever it might be. I think people are starting to catch on to that. And I'm really happy to see that, it's not something that people fall back on, being in a trade. Because I think that was the common, especially whenever I was going through school, and even some people a little bit older than me, it's like, we're going to go to school, we're going to get a 4-year degree, and then we don't have to do this. Whenever they say this, and they're, maybe they're meaning, a trade. But now I think that mindset has flipped, and it seems like people are seeking out to be in the trades, and it's really reassuring, especially for us, knowing that there's a younger pool of talent that's actually interested in the trades and learning. So for us in our region specifically, we seem very hopeful for the labor pool that's coming up in the younger generation.
Yeah. And especially without the debt, a 5, 6-figure debt of a nurse or lawyer or a business professional, just starting out. I mean, that's a big difference.
Yeah.
In time. And they're 4 years ahead of the game too. You're starting 4 years sooner.
Correct. I don't know what that calculation is off the top of my head, but if you take the debt plus what you earned over those 4 years, it's a pretty large number, especially at a young age getting started. So,
I've seen estimates, especially just using basic income of average annual salaries in the trades. You're talking about a $250,000 to $300,000 swing in any market in geography. The difference of debt plus what you actually made over those 4 years. And think about it, it's not hard to get there. If you make 50 grand a year on average over a 4-year period of time, just starting out, which is not impossible over the 4-year duration.
Yep.
There's $200,000 right there.
Yep.
Yeah.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Well, tell me, I want to get to the point. We've gotten to the point now where I have this little rapid fire questions I like to ask at the end. So I'm going to ask these 3 quick questions and you give me the answer that first comes to mind.
Okay.
All right. What's the best advice you've ever received?
I didn't receive it directly, but it's been something that I've lived by my entire life. Whenever I was younger, my dad had this old little laptop that, whenever he would take it home and work sometimes. And in there, he had a little piece of paper on it and it was taped to it. And it said, "Chance favors those in motion." And it took me a little bit of time before I really resonated with what that meant. But pretty much what I've lived by and worked by, ever since I read that. I think that indirectly, that was probably the best advice that I ever received. And that's constantly being out there, putting yourself out there, taking risk, calculated risk, and doing things like that. And, I don't know what the common adage is and the word verbiage around it, but the more you put yourself out there and the more it's not, people say you're lucky, but you're constantly working. So I'd say chance favors those in motion. That's something that I live by. And I'd say that's still, as of now, the best advice that I've received so far.
Yeah, I love that. I couldn't agree more with you on that. That's luck is something that you can create and definitely happens by putting yourself out there, and then it comes across like luck. But there's just so many things you learn along the way while you're trying and failing, or trying
Yeah.
and succeeding.
Yeah. A little bit of both.
That's right. What's your favorite business book?
Oh, that's a tough one. People ask about books. I read a lot of books, so it's hard to pick a favorite. I really like one that stands out to me is "Am I Being Too Subtle?" By Sam Zell. I really like his story, and he mixes, his background with where he came from and how he grew into his business, and then he talks about specific deals and strategy and stuff. And it's a really entertaining autobiography / business book. So I'd say, as of now to date, that's probably my favorite one so far.
I like it. And in your industry, what's the most underrated skill?
And speaking in terms of trades, I would say masonry is by far the most that those guys, they are hard asses. They absolutely kill it. But unfortunately there's not a lot of masonry crews left or coming up, especially in our area. So I would say to me, I'd say that's the most underrated trade or skill is masonry.
That's pretty uniform across the way, man. If you got a great mason, you kind of lean on them heavy until you can't, and you just pray they give you a price, but you take it and you work from there. That's the advice I'm seeing with masonry right now. You certainly you get to a certain scale, certain size jobs. There's more competition, but in those lower to mid markets, if you got a great masonry crew, man, they're like you said, they're doing what they want.
Yeah.
That's a good business to start if you're going to be in the trades. Figure that out.
Yes, that is an excellent one to start, especially in Southern Indiana.
I love it. I love it. Well, Ruger, tell me how can people find you? Are you on social media? If people are interested in your business, your company, they want to learn more from you, they want to come work with you guys, work for you guys, work in and around your businesses, what's the best way for them to come find you?
Best way, I'm not big on social media, but LinkedIn, I'd say professionally, that's the best place to reach me. And it's just Ruger Kerstiens and then comma CPM next to my name. There's not a lot of other Rugers out there, so should be able to find it.
I love it. I love it. Well, man, I really appreciate you coming on, sharing your story. I love what you're doing in Southern Indiana. I'm honestly, quite frankly, what you're doing in Southern Indiana would work well just about anywhere else too. So you should give yourself some props and credit for that. The markets are tough, and what you guys are doing in yours with your challenges is really impressive. And especially as a long generational business, it's really cool to see, man. So kudos to you and your family.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Welcome. You're welcome. Well, everybody, I hope you liked this episode. If you did, please share it. Give Ruger and I both a follow on LinkedIn. Check out their businesses if you're in Southern Indiana. If you're a mason, now you know where you might want to go put some crews. I'm sure you'll at least get a return phone call. And in the meantime, everybody have a great week, and God bless you.